Here I am again with the sixth part of the history of experience. This time we take our first look into a historic period and start with the Paleolithic, which is, as I've said before, the first revolution, the place, the time of the first revolution in the history of human experience, which was a turn to imagination, leading away from a creature who was more or less lost in sensation to a new, let's say, animal tribe that has something that we would call the internal eye. I will look into what this is like. But before I go to the details in the historic part, I take another brief look into my personal historic experience to explain a little bit what is going on when we turn from what is called implicit memory to explicit memory. So this takes us back to an even earlier part of my life, which must have been about the age of 3 years. That was my first visit to a zoo. And my most impressive animal, no surprise, was the elephant. What you cannot see here is that he was, playing a musical instrument, and that's why I was even more impressed. But here it's gone already. So that was taken by my father, and that's the actual elephant. And when I got back home, I had heard so many stories about the elephant and where it lived usually. I wanted to paint it, and that was the result. That's original painting from me. Isn't that strange? I mean, I have placed the elephant somewhere in a surrounding that I thought to be a jungle, and I quite precisely remember who was sitting on that elephant. It was Tarzan, the guy who was living in the jungle. And to the right you have a palm tree, and that strange creature, it looks like a mice. It's actually an ape, but you wouldn't recognize. In the background you have the sun and the mountains, but the most important is the elephant in the foreground. You certainly realize that there's something wrong with that elephant. If you look at the tail, it's far too, low, placed too low on the body. The ears are a little bit too long. The legs are bent pretty strange. The back is too low, and so forth and so forth. And I remember one thing very precisely about painting this, drawing this animal. I knew exactly that I've seen it. And I knew exactly what it looked like, but I couldn't envisage that anymore. All the time I tried to get the picture into my head, it would sort of collapse. No, it would not even show up. So I took resort to drawing schemes. It's a mixture of a horse and whatever else, but it's not an elephant. This internal struggle of recovering a memory, this is a kind of training that we need to build our memory. What I knew about the elephant was implicit. I knew I've seen the elephant, but I couldn't bring it back. And the ability to bring these pictures back, that is what is called the turn to imagination. It needs a certain amount of brain capacity and training to do so. Now, if you now look at a mammoth, it's not an elephant, but pretty close by, that one was drawn 13,000 years before our present, or even more. And you see here that the people who have done that, look at the hair, look at the shape of the back, look at the position of the tail, the position of the legs, all that fur hanging down here, and the bent over trunk. It looks a little bit sad because it's probably facing its enemies. But anyway, the observation is very precise, and the ability to recover that and put it on the wall in a cave, it's really stunning. You cannot learn this within a week. You don't learn this within a month. You don't learn this within 1 year. The average time you need today to become a professional painter that is so precise like this would anything between 4 and 10 years. It's not pretty quickly done. So, you know, these people in these times, they have spent a lot of effort in training how to paint animals. It's really stunning. So, what happens here is you go from implicit memory to explicit memory or remembrance or the inner eye. Now to repeat that once again, the capacity for memory is present in almost the entire animal and I think at least in some parts of the plant universe. Even little worms and insects, after a while, they have a memory where to go, what it means, and so forth. But they cannot, we have never seen that, you know, visualize what they know. The difference is between implicit and explicit memory, that with explicit memory you can remember and visualize the place where you want to go tomorrow. With implicit memory, it just is enough, you know how to get there. You don't need to know what it looks like before you go there. To get to this point, to develop the inner eye, takes a lot of progress by training. And the result of that is a turn to imagination in the end. So that's what we see when we come to the next chapter in this part, the incubation of a symbolic culture. You know, for millions of years, humans, or the predecessors of today's humans, have been around the globe. About 2 million years ago, our forefathers and foremothers have started to build simple tools. Here we have an example of a very simple tool which is about 2 million years old, made from pebbles. So what they would do, they would take a pebble somewhere laying around and sharpen it by, you know, clashing 2 pebbles together until they split, and you have a sharp edge. You can use this to punch, to kill, to make small pieces of a large piece of meat. Over the ages, these are refined by and by, but for many, almost 2 million years, people did do nothing else but these kind of instruments. That's all we have. So, tens of thousands of stone tools left over this huge amount of years, but nothing else. But then, by and by, these instruments are supplemented by symbols. And to end up with symbols, it needs a lot of deliberate practice. That's a technical term for training. And the ability to develop a more precise and explicit form of memory is motivated by moving from simple to more and more complex tools. Because at some time in the development of tools, you need to know what kind of tool you can make out of a certain piece of stone before you start working. You need to know it in advance, because otherwise you cannot do the planning. So the need for doing planning is the first step into the development of the imagination. Another reason may be the development of language or the telling of campsite stories, but this is just a guess. We don't have any evidence for that. But for the complex tools that need some advanced planning, we have plenty of evidence. So to understand what is happening there, we need to have a precise understanding of what is the difference between an instrument and a symbol. And the difference is pretty simple. If you have an instrument, you want to impact on object. Like when I take this knife and that apple and cut it in two. So what I do here is I impact on the object. That's what a tool is for. But a symbol is something that impacts on the imagination. So the apple is an object at the same time. It is a symbol as well. If we go back to the days of paradise, the apple has become the symbol of temptation, of the forbidden fruit, of what led Adam and Eve into the fall from grace. So whenever we see an apple depicted on a picture that is given from Eve to Adam, we know what it means. It has a symbolic meaning. It's not just feed Adam, but it's the beginning of a sad story that ended with our expulsion and everybody's expulsion from paradise. So that's the difference between a tool and a symbol. And what we have to differentiate as well is the difference between a symbol and a signal. So for example, a typical signal is when I wave my hands to greet people. Hello. But the use of a signal compared to a symbol is always tied to a present situation. When I want to get the attention of somebody who is passing by, I can wave my hand and say, hi. And even if the person doesn't hear me, they can still see my hand waving. But if nobody is around, and I would be all alone in a room like this, and I wave my hand and cry, hello, everybody would think I'm just crazy, because it makes no sense. So a signal is always tied to a certain situation. But a symbol isn't. You know, when I say, for example, send a message to my wife, and I say, Andrea, I love you. This makes sense anytime. This makes sense tomorrow. It made sense yesterday. And as long as this symbol is here, it will make sense to somebody. In this case, to my wife. It's not tied to a certain situation. This is meant forever. So we have a difference between a signal and a symbol illustrated by waving a hand or sending a message. So what happens when people start developing a symbolic culture is that they develop something, an information system that is meant for a long time, endurance. And this starts about 400,000 years before present. Here we have an engraved bone fragment from Bilsingsleben and Oldisleben. These are two places in the east of Germany. And below we have an ochre piece from Blombos Cave about 100,000 years before present. Ochre is used for painting things, like on the walls in the cave of our Paleolithic foremothers. And here we have an ochre piece that is engraved with certain abstract signs, indicating that it has a special meaning to the people, not just a piece of mud. In other cases, we have much earlier, compared to these old abstract signs, we have Venus statuettes, which appear about 50,000 years ago. There are some older specimens which are very uncertain in dating, but we are pretty sure that they start about 50,000 years before Christ. Then we have beads in various forms. So this is embroidery or jewelry made from shells, from mussels and clams. And we also have the parietal art, which means the art that is on surfaces, like engravings and paintings. And this we will turn to in our next chapter, when we go to the part 7, the Paleolithic, and the full articulation of the turn to imagination. Thank you for today.